What's going on, everyone? It is another Wednesday, which means we get to do some Q&A. So had a lot of questions come in this week. Please keep those questions coming. Remember, down below, go ahead and post your questions in the comments section. If I did not get to your question this week, please continue to ask it. I will get to your question, I promise. So again, super important you continue to post questions. And again, this, if you're new to this is my weekly Q&A where people submit their questions to me to hear my opinion. Now, these are opinion-based questions. These are not questions that are factual or there's a right or a wrong answer. It's just kind of my opinion on something. And, you know, there are times that you'll disagree with it. Doesn't mean that I'm always right, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea of where I stand on different topics. But with that said, let's take a look at our very first question right now. I've been collecting baseball cards off and on since the 1970s. I collected my favorite teams and players for the love of the hobby, not their value. Which way do you approach the hobby and why? A similar question, so I decided to ask it with it. Here's an age-old hobby question. Do you collect cards of players you don't like or from teams that you don't like? All right, two very similar questions, right? Slightly different tone to the question as far as the specifics of it. But I mean, ultimately, we're collectors. And ultimately, this whole sports card collecting thing is all about what are we collecting. Now, there are certain people that collect one or two players. There are certain people that collect one or two sets. For years and years and years, my dad, for example, he collected a couple of sets. He collected a 59 set and then a 60 set. Actually, he did the 60 and then the 59. And then he was collecting some of the 58 stars. And there are certain people who collect years and players. And let me start with the part of the question from Golden Slumber about, are there players that I don't collect? And I think that's a really interesting question. I don't really have a ton of players or people that I don't like. Now, when I think about athletes and, I was a Niner fan. So during the early 90s and mid 90s, it was like, Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, because at the time they were really good and it was affecting the 49er dynasty from the 80s. And so I had like negative opinions on them. But now I don't have any negative opinions on those guys. I don't think I hate Emmitt Smith. The reason I didn't like Emmitt Smith is because he was so good. As a Yankee fan and as a Roger Clemens fan, I always had these kind of negative thoughts of Pedro Martinez. It's not like Pedro really, well, there was the Don Zimmer incident, but that, they were both at fault there. But, it's not like I dislike Pedro necessarily as a person. And again, that was years and years ago. And I get over that kind of stuff. I don't like hold a grudge. So players that I avoid, I don't really, ever since I read this question, I've been thinking, who do I not like? And I can't really think of anyone that I don't really like. Pedro Martinez, I was not a fan of. I'm not really a fan of, but I don't really have an issue with Pedro so much anymore. So there's not really anyone that I avoid because even the players that when they were playing, I may not have liked that much. I don't really have those negative feelings about them anymore. So no, there's not really anyone I avoid. I kind of like everyone. So the cards that I go after, are there certain guys that I tend to target? Yeah, there are. I really like Gale Sayers. I really like the Gale Sayers story with, Brian Piccolo and Brian's song. So I have fond thoughts of Gale Sayers. So I have almost a complete run of Gale Sayers. You know, growing up, I've told the story about how I was a big Roger Clemens fan because in Little League, I was a pitcher and I was on the Red Sox. And that was in like 1987, 88 when Roger Clemens was a stud, even though he was on the Red Sox. But I was a huge Roger Clemens fan. So I have like tons of Roger Clemens cards from my childhood that I still have. I used to go to the value bins at the card shows when I was a kid in the, late 80s and 90s. And I would go through the value bins. And at the time, the cards were $0.25 a piece. Some of you probably remember those quarter bins. And I would look for any Clemens card I didn't already have. And I didn't have a checklist or anything. I had a really good memory of which ones I had because I looked at them so much. So I would go through the boxes, and if there was a Clemens card I didn't have, I'd pull them out, I'd buy them, go on to the next dealer, and I'd look for more Clemens cards I didn't have. So I have tons and tons of Clemens cards. I've talked a lot about how the spelling of my name, Graig, has really originated because, my dad was a huge Yankee fan. And in the late 70s, when the Yankees were making playoff runs, Greg Nettles had some, incredible postseasons, especially defensively. And so they liked the name Greg, and Greg Nettles was spelled Graig. And so, I obviously became a Greg Nettles fan, and I've got a couple of Greg Nettles autographs, but I also have a lot of Greg Nettles cards. So I definitely collect Greg Nettles, and I definitely collect Roger Clemens because of that. And I've had those cards since I was like 8. Another player that I like, that I collect, I have a former student named Matt Manning. He's in the Detroit Tigers rotation. And he got caught he had a ball, hit his foot early in the season and broke a bone. So he's been on the DL for the last month and a half, 2 months, but he's gearing up now, doing bullpen sessions to come back. And when I had Matt as a student, Matt was an awesome guy. He was the 9th overall pick in the draft. I had him, so my school is on a 4 block system where you have 4 periods in the year. And at the end of the year, Matt's spring season, it was a baseball season, but the spring semester, the end of his senior year, he had 4 classes and 2 of them were with me. And at the time, it was when he participated in the Under Armour Perfect Game national showcase down at Petco Park in San Diego, and I had Matt, and Matt was gone for like a week because he went down and pitched in that, and I'm watching him on TV, and then right after graduation is when he gets drafted number 9th overall and gets this huge signing bonus. And the thing about Matt is he's such a great guy. He's so down to earth. He doesn't even have social media because he doesn't even want to deal with that stuff. So you can't follow him on Twitter or Instagram because he just doesn't do it. So I love collecting Matt's cards, especially his first Bowman card. So I have a lot of his first Bowman rookie cards, and I root heavily for Matt. So yeah, I definitely collect people that I like. And, 3 of the guys that I have the most cards of would be Clemens, Nettles, and Matt Manning. In fact, one of the most special cards in my collection is, occasionally I'll be in Target and I'll see like a hanger box or something. I'm like, I want to open some packs just for the heck of it. And I opened, I think it was a mega pack or jumbo pack or something. And I pulled one of Matt's cards out of a pack. I mean, how weird is that? You're opening a pack of cards and you pull a former student. And, I still see Matt sometimes. We've golfed since he's been, in the majors when he comes home and stuff. And so that's a super special card that I have, that I actually have up in my classroom. And, I teach my students, and I'll refer to some of my former students like Matt. And, one of the classes I teach is personal finance. And so I'll say, hey, you never know how much money you're going to have. You might be like Matt, and I'll point to the card. And so those are guys that I collect. I definitely collect guys that I like a lot. I collect a lot of their cards, but there's not really anyone I avoid because there aren't a lot of people that I dislike. So I hope that answers that question. Kind of a double question in one. But let's go ahead and look at our second question right now.
Do you think younger collectors will have any interest in pre-war cards? Why did you buy pre-war cards?
All right, so I was super excited when I saw that Orlando from A Collector's Dream posted a question. I have a huge amount of admiration for Orlando and his channel. He's very active in the YouTube sports card setting, and really like Orlando. If you don't follow Orlando's channel, check out Orlando's channel at A Collector's Dream. A really positive guy, great guy, a huge supporter of just basically any collector. To answer your question, Orlando, yeah, I always, as a kid, I used to go to the big shows. I mean, San Francisco had like the big show. Bob Lee was the promoter, and it was usually Labor Day weekend. And some of the nationals, the original nationals, I believe were even in San Francisco that I attended. And there were a lot of shows in Northern California that I went to. And I would see these cards. I would see these tobacco cards. I mean, I remember, seeing Mr. Mint at some of the shows, and he was always the first table when you walked in. And one of his cases just had $100 bills fanned out. And he would always have, maybe 10 cards. And he would have some of the, Honus Wagner cards. And he had 52 Mantles. And he had some of those big cards. And you'd go to these big shows like that. And I would see those cards and I would just be like, those are so cool. They're so unique. They're so recognizable. But I couldn't afford those. I was a kid that would show up with $50 that I saved all year long for this big show. And I couldn't buy a card like, a T206 card or a Caramel card or a Gaudi card or any of those types of early T205s. There's so many really cool cards from back then that there's no way I could afford them. I mean, one of my favorite sets is that Cracker Jack set that has the Joe Jackson card in it. So many cool cards. I always liked them, but I could never afford them. I'm finally at a point in my life where, I can occasionally afford one, so I still want to have them. Do I think younger collectors will collect them? I talked about this a little bit in a video that I posted last week. I do think a lot of younger collectors are eventually going to pivot into older cards. I just really do. I think if you buy enough, of the younger prospect cards and you lose enough times because there's just a few that are going to really make it and take off, I think what's going to happen is I think they're going to want to stay in cards, but they're going to want to stay in things that are more stable. And I've noticed that with a lot of the dealers that I see at shows is a lot of the guys that had almost all new stuff are slowly starting to have one case of new and one case of vintage. And I've asked them, why are you doing that? And they're like, it's the stability, it's the safety of it. I think more and more are going to do that. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I really believe that people are going to want to stay in the hobby, but they're going to need to stay in something that's more stable, at least partly. Even Mojo Cards, who, it's from the Sacramento area. He grew up in Granite Bay, right up the road from here. And he's even talked about getting more and more into vintage cards. I think it's going to happen. I really do. I think pre-war is the creme de la creme of vintage stuff. And I really think it's stable. And here's the last thing about it. There's so few of them out there that it doesn't take a lot of people to want them for them to continue to have value. If you look on the PSA registry of, the T206 Ty Cobb red background card, there aren't that many of them. So it doesn't take a lot of people to want one for them to be expensive. So yeah, I think they're going to continue to hold value. I think they're going to continue to appreciate in value. And I think they're a safe, good place to go if they interest you. If you like them, you should get them. I like them. I'm going to continue picking them up.
Top hottest vintage baseball cards right now. Mays, Mantle, Aaron, Clemente, Rose, and others including Kaline, Killebrew, Seaver, Ryan, and Brooks and Frank Robinson. Who is in demand in your opinion?
All right, this is a great question. Now, personally, I know that there are a lot of trend trackers and websites and databases and apps out there that will track whose cards are hot and whose cards aren't hot. And so I'm assuming that that's where the data came from of naming the players that were named. Now, to me, Mantle, Mays, Aaron, and Clemente are four guys that are going to kind of always be hot. Personally, I don't have any of those apps. I don't follow any of those apps. So my only information is based on what I personally see, and I don't have any data to prove it. So again, this is just kind of anecdotally. When I've gone to shows, and a dealer would probably be the best person to ask this too, because they know what people are asking about and people are buying. I definitely think those four, I see a lot of purchases all the time. Beyond those four, here's what I personally have witnessed. I've seen a lot of Koufax cards being purchased. A lot of the times when I'm looking through a case and somebody's buying something, I see a lot of Koufax go. I think he's a hot one. I think he's always kind of hot. I think a lot of people consider him, one of the most dominant pitchers of all time. The only reason why they don't consider him even, the best of all time is because of the length of his career. He just didn't pitch for very long. But I mean, like his win-loss percentage, his Cy Youngs, all of the, unbelievable. And he seems hot to me. He always seems hot to me. Another one that I think is hot as far as, what people are buying is, I feel like I've noticed Jackie Robinson is a card that continues to climb. While some cards have kind of slowed down and dipped a little bit, I don't feel like I've seen that a lot with Jackie Robinson. I don't think I've seen that a lot with Larry Doby. I don't think I've seen that a lot with Minnie Minoso. I think that, culturally and some of the things that the majors have done with finally recognizing some of the Negro League statistics in players' career stats has helped with that a lot. I think that the fact that, culturally, some of those players that were overlooked for a long time and weren't given the credit that they deserved for a long time have been making the Hall of Fame. Minoso is a more recent one, for example. So I do think that those three guys, in addition to Koufax, are what I see people continue to be buying a lot of. But, Monty Irvin is another one. I think probably the same reason. I feel like I see a lot of Monty Irvin stuff being purchased. But again, that's just anecdotal. I trust whatever the trend trackers say, but that's what I personally see as cards that are holding value and cards that are being purchased when I'm at shows.
I'm an avid Pete Rose collector. I think his cards will explode in value when he passes away because I think he will be admitted to the Hall of Fame when he dies. What are your thoughts on this?
All right, so I think the Pete Rose question is a great one. I bought a Pete Rose card this weekend at the card show that I was at. And I bought it because there's a lot of reasons I bought it, but it was perfectly centered. It looked like the nicest six I'd ever seen in my life. But one of the things I really like about cards is any of the all-time greats, when there's a card where they look super young because it dates the card. And to me, the 68 Pete Rose that I bought, the picture, he just looks like a kid. And to me, that there's something that I really have an appeal for the cards where the people look really young, because, it humanizes the players. We think of them at the end of their career. We think of them receiving the Hall of Fame awards and interviews afterwards, looking back on their career. We don't think about this young, kid who came up out of high school and before they were really, really great or considered really great. So as far as Pete Rose goes, that question came up at the table. I asked sort of the people standing around, what do you guys think? Like, will Pete Rose make the Hall of Fame? And a lot of people thought no. They thought he won't even after he dies. And the reason for that is because of the Shoeless Joe thing. Shoeless Joe's still not in the Hall of Fame. So if Shoeless Joe's not in the Hall of Fame because he's been banned for, basically betting on the game, allegedly, then they're not going to unban Pete Rose. If they had set the standard that, okay, once you've passed, then we'll consider it, then I would think Rose would get in. If Rose gets in or not, will it affect his card prices? I don't know, because his card prices are already fairly high. I mean, look at his rookie card. It's really, really expensive. So will it go way up? I mean, maybe. I don't know. I think this is a really interesting question. I'd be interested in hearing your comments from everyone below. What do you guys think about Pete Rose? Will he get in? And if he gets in, will his cards go up? I know a lot of people think he's going to get in when he passes. And I think a lot of people think his cards will go up when that happens. I just don't know about that one. So I picked the question because I think it's a great question. I just don't know if I have a very confident opinion on it. I think he should be in. He's got more hits than anybody of all time. I want to be a forgiving society. I want to be a forgiving person. I mean, I don't know how you have one of the best hitters of all time, one of the best players of all time, not in the Hall of Fame, but I do understand the character thing too. So, tough question. I don't know if I have a good answer. I turn it back to all of you. What do you guys think?
Do you collect oddball cards? What I mean by that is regional cards only sold in certain cities for their home team. Cards put out by local companies of hometown teams. These are usually rare because they were not nationally sold.
All right, so oddball cards and regional cards, and I don't specifically set out to buy that kind of stuff. And not because I'm against that kind of stuff. It's just not like I go, I'm an oddball collector. That's not particularly my thing. My thing continues to be collecting cards. When I look at them, I go, that's a cool looking card. That's a cool player. That's a card that I like the looks of. And so I buy it. And if the card happens to be an oddball card, I'm cool with that. But I don't set out for them. Earlier in this particular video, I was talking about how I'm a Clemens collector. And in looking through some of my Clemens cards, I mean, I have KB Toys cards of Clemens. I have dog food cards of Clemens. I have Wonder Bread cards of Clemens and sunflower seed cards of Clemens. So yeah, I think people who collect certain players don't care where the card came from. They just want the cards of players, In this card show video that I did from this weekend, one of the things I was looking through is Roberto Clemente cards. I was looking through post-serial cards, and I pulled the Roberto Clemente card that I really thought about buying. But I ended up not buying it. But I'm open to it. If it's a player that I'm into, if it's a card that looks cool, it doesn't have to be like a Topps for me to be interested in it. But I don't specifically set out for those rarer regional cards personally. But I totally understand why some people do. I have an appreciation for what some people do. But again, at the end of the day, we got to collect what we like. And if you like those sorts of things, go get them. If you don't like those sorts of things, don't get them just because you think that you should. So that's kind of my take on that. So that wraps it up for this week. Again, don't forget, down below, post your questions if you have them. I look forward to seeing what everybody has for me for next week.
As always, if you've not yet taken a chance to subscribe to my channel, I hope that you will. Hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much.